Hello everyone, Simon here. Let's continue learning about psychology and neuroscience with Google Gemini 3. So next up, let's move on to psychotic disorders and schizophrenia mainly. All right, let's move on to psychosis. So here, yeah, psychotic disorders. Psychotic disorders next. The big one is schizophrenia. What is it? What is schizophrenia? What is going on inside the person's brain? And what does that cause them to experience? So psychosis is strange because you get hallucinations and all sorts of things that are difficult to understand, right? So let's see what Gemini says. Schizophrenia is often misunderstood as split personality, but in neuroscience we view it as a split from reality. It is a profound neurodevelopmental disorder where the brain's ability to organize, filter, and interpret information breaks down. Right. So you can no longer figure out what reality is schizophrenia. In our three-story house, schizophrenia is a state where the filters between the floors have failed. The brain becomes flooded with internal noise that it mistakes for external reality. Right. So the internal signals become indistinguishable from the external signals. So this is hallucinations, right? So instead of, you're trying to see the outside world, but the images that come from inside your brain become indistinguishable from the things you see in the outside world, and so you hallucinate, basically. The dopamine hypothesis, the volume control problem. The most famous explanation for schizophrenia involves dopamine, but specifically how it is distributed in two different neighborhoods of the brain. Too much dopamine in the basement, mesolimbic pathway. High dopamine in the limbic system causes positive symptoms, things that are added to reality. The brain starts assigning high importance to random sounds or thoughts. A car door slamming isn't just a noise. The brain decides it is a coded message. This leads to hallucinations and delusions. Right. So dopamine makes you focus on things, right? And so you're focusing on the wrong things and you're seeing false positives, right? You're seeing things that aren't actually there. Too little dopamine in the penthouse mesocortical pathway. Low dopamine in the prefrontal cortex causes negative symptoms, things taken away from the person. This leads to a loss of motivation, flattened emotions, and a poverty of speech. Right, so you're feeling more, you're thinking less, and you think your feelings are real when they're not. Or you're kind of assigning more importance to things than they actually are. The filter failure, the thalamus. The thalamus is the grand central station of the brain. Its job is to filter out 99% of the sensory data received so the CEO cortex can focus. Yeah, by the way, so most of the things you see and hear and feel, you're not even aware of because it's not important. So for example, I'm reading the screen right now, and so everything else, it just gets filtered out. Like I don't care about that stuff. And that's how your brain is able to process information, by focusing only on a little bit of it. The malfunction. In schizophrenia, the thalamus becomes leaky, it stops filtering. Right, so a lot of things starts going into your attention when they're not actually important. The experience. Imagine being in a crowded restaurant where you can hear every conversation at once. The hum of the refrigerator is as loud as a shout, and the pattern on the wallpaper seems to be moving. The brain is overwhelmed by sensory input it cannot organize. Ooh, fascinating. So you're not filtering the sensory input correctly, and so everything is important at the same time. Structural changes, the pruning gone wrong. Schizophrenia usually emerges in late adolescence or early adulthood. This is because the brain undergoes a process called synaptic pruning. The CEO trims away unused connections to make the brain more efficient. The glitch. In schizophrenia, it appears the brain over-prunes. It cuts away too many connections, particularly in the prefrontal cortex and temporal lobes. So prefrontal cortex, temporal lobes. The result, the ventricles, the fluid-filled spaces in the brain actually become larger because there's less brain tissue surrounding them. The loss of tissue makes it harder for the brain regions to talk to each other in a coordinated way. Interesting. So you get bigger holes in your brain, which interferes with the communication between different parts of the brain. For the symptoms, the three categories. So there's positives, the hallucinations and delusions. Right, your limbic system is overactive. Negative symptoms, social withdrawal, lack of emotion, and then the cognitive problems, disorganized thinking, memory trouble. You're unable to sort out your thoughts. The thalamus is failing to route signals. Why the voices, the Broca's area glitch? One of the most striking symptoms is auditory hallucinations. When a person with schizophrenia hears voices, brain scans shows activity in the Broca's area, the part of the brain that produces speech. Not the part that understands speech. The interpretation error. Essentially, the person is thinking, talking to themselves internally, but their brain fails to recognize the thought as self-generated, because the self-monitor in the frontal lobe is weak. The brain interprets its own internal monologue as an external voice coming from outside. Wow. So they're generating the voices that they're hearing, but they can't identify that it's their own voice, so they think it's somebody else. Treatment balancing the chemicals, antipsychotics. These drugs primarily block dopamine receptors. They are very effective at quieting the hallucinations, turning down the basement volume, but they often struggle to fix the negative symptoms, waking up the penthouse. So interesting. So interesting. So this is like it's a brain problem that's quite difficult to understand because it's not, a lot of the other stuff so far. It's like, for example, or you have too much fear or too much anger or. Whereas this, it's like it's the connections between different parts of your brains and the communications between the different parts of your brain that are failing, and you're unable to recognize like what is real and what's not. You're unable to recognize what is you and what is the outside. Very interesting. There's also delusional disorder. Not sure how that's different from schizophrenia though. Maybe it's just like a more specific kind. Let's ask about that. Tell me about delusional disorder. How is it different from schizophrenia if they both involve wait, delusion is not hallucinations, is it? No, delusion is something else. Uh, if both believe in things that aren't real, um, what is going on in the brain of someone with delusional disorder? While both disorders involve a break from reality, this delusional disorder is much more surgical. Yes, it's more specific. If schizophrenia is a total earthquake that disrupts the entire brain's three-story house, Delusional disorder is more like a single haunted room in a house that otherwise looks completely normal. That otherwise looks completely normal. Ah, yes, very normal person. The primary difference lies in the preservation of function and the nature of the belief. Right. The core difference is bizarre versus non-bizarre. What's bizarre? Delusions are often impossible. For example, aliens replaced my organs with light bulbs. Is that impossible? I mean, it's unlikely. Delusions are non-bizarre, things that could happen but aren't. For example, the FBI is following me or my spouse is cheating. Or maybe, but maybe that could be real. I mean, putting light bulbs in your body could be real too. It's less likely. But your spouse cheating on you, that's quite likely, right? I mean, hallucinations. Common and frequent hearing voices. Hallucinations are rare or absent. So hallucinations when you're like, you see things that aren't there or you hear things that aren't there. So the delusional person is not hallucinating. They believe something is happening when it's not, but not in the sense that they're hearing things or seeing things, right? Daily functioning. Schizophrenia, a significant impairment in hygiene, work, and speech. So they just can't function, right? They just can't do it because their thoughts are too disordered. Whereas a delusional disorder, usually high functioning, people may keep jobs and social lives for years. So they believe the FBI is following them. But aside from that, everything else is fine. Like they go to work, they go home, they have a family, right? They eat breakfast, they eat dinner, they go to sleep. Everything's fine except the FBI is always there. Amazing, right? So everything else is fine, but that's the strange part, right? That's like how can everything else be fine and you only believe that thing that isn't real? Huh. The cerebral cortex, disorganized and foggy thinking. So this is just completely disordered. Highly organized and logical, except for the one delusion. Except for that one problem, everything else is very normal. All right, the brain, the overactive logic circuit. In schizophrenia, we saw that the filter, the thalamus, fails. In delusional disorder, the problem is more about hypothesizing. Huh. The salience network. This is the part of your brain that decides what is important. In delusional disorder, the anterior cingulate cortex and insula assign extreme importance to a neutral event. So it's a very specific problem where there's like one thing that should be just unimportant, but for some reason the brain has made it very important or has decided that it's very important. Example, you see a white car parked on your street. A healthy brain thinks nice car. A delusional brain salience network screams warning significance. So the salience network is just misfiring, right? The jump to conclusions bias. Most brains require a lot of evidence to change a belief. People with delusional disorder have a bias where the right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the right dorsolateral accepts a conclusion based on very little data and then locks the door. Yeah. So you're just short-circuiting all the evidence part, and you just decide that's true. Wow. Right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. I don't know if this is gonna give us right dorsal. Nope. Dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Yeah, no, I don't think this is gonna. Cortex? Yeah, no, basically it's just the location of your prefrontal cortex. The two-factor theory of delusion. Neuroscientists often use the two-factor model to explain what is happening. Factor 1, the glitchy input, the living room. Something feels wrong or significant due to a dopamine spike in the limbic system. Factor 2, the broken elevator, the penthouse, or the broken evaluator. Normally your prefrontal cortex would say that's a silly theory. In delusional disorder, the right frontal lobe fails to reject the glitchy thought. Instead of dismissing it, the brain uses its logic to support it. Huh. Common flavors of delusional disorder. Because the rest of the brain is working fine, a person uses their intelligence to build an elaborate logical world around the glitch. Erotomanic. Believing a famous person is in love with you. They interpret a celebrity's blink on TV as a coded I love you. Grandiose. Believing they have a great but unrecognized talent or have made a vital discovery. Uh-huh. Persecutory. Believing they are being conspired against or spied on. Right. Somatic. Believing they have a physical defect or medical condition despite clear tests. You know, a lot of people have some of this stuff. I'm just saying. This is not. A lot of people have some of this. At what point does it become a disorder, right? Why is it so hard to treat? In schizophrenia, the person is often so disorganized that they know something is wrong. In delusional disorder, because the prefrontal cortex is still functioning, it protects the delusion. The person uses logic to explain away any evidence that they are wrong. The logic trap. If you show a persecutory delusional person proof that the FBI isn't outside, their brain says, of course they aren't there now, they saw you coming. That proves how smart they are. Yeah, no, a lot of people are like this. But not a lot of you. Like, a lot of people can be like this. Uh, I want to ask more about this. Um, but delusional disorder seems almost indistinguishable from a normal person. Seems almost indistinguishable from a normal person. Normal person. How is it that they have delusions about one very specific thing, but their brain processes everything else correctly? Or is it that, like, do they uh periodically shift from one delusion to another? Like, I don't, like, how do you differentiate? How do you differentiate healthy uh skep skepticism? How do you spell skepticism? Oh, we're Americans, all right. How do you differentiate healthy skepticism from delusional disorder? Is that what I want to ask? Okay, let's ask this. This is the razor's edge of psychiatry. Delusional disorder is uniquely haunting because unlike someone with schizophrenia who might appear scrambled, A person with delusional disorder often appears articulate, rational, and composed until you hit the landmine of their specific belief. Right? Like they are very normal until they are not. To understand how the brain can be broken in one spot but perfect in others, we have to look at the difference between processing and valuation. The encapsulated delusion. In neuroscience, we call this an encapsulated delusion. Think of a brain like a computer server. In schizophrenia, the operating system has crashed. In delusional disorder, the operating system is fine, but one specific file is corrupted. But what corrupted it, right? Because look, okay, the file, okay, fine, the file's corrupted. But for example, if your hard drive is failing, then it would also corrupt other files, is what I'm trying to say. Why is it that one file corrupted and then nothing else? The logic is intact. The person uses their lateral prefrontal cortex, the logic center, perfectly. If they believe the FBI is watching them, they will use highly logical steps to evade them. They'll use cache, change their route, and encrypt their phone. The actions are logical, only the premise is wrong. The salience glitch. The malfunction is in the ventral striatum and the insula. These areas assign importance to things. In this disorder, a single theme, like infidelity or persecution, is assigned a salient score of 100 out of 100. Once that score is locked in, the rest of the brain's logic is recruited to serve that one truth. A single theme, though. So it's not like, oh, the FBI is following me. It's more like, you know, a like someone is following you. Or like infidelity, if you have a salience attached to infidelity, then no matter who your girlfriend is, you would think they're cheating on you. So you think someone's cheating on you, you break up with them, you find another girlfriend, and then you also think that girlfriend is also cheating on you, so you break up with them, find another one, and again. So it's not like you're not saying that specific person is cheating on me. It's just that in your brain, infidelity has this really high salient score, right? Do they shift from one delusion to another? Usually no. Unlike the shifting, disorganized hallucinations of schizophrenia, delusions in this disorder are remarkably stable and persistent. Why? How does that work? The thematic actor. A person usually has one theme. Yeah, so it's a theme, not a specific thing, but a theme. For example, persecutory or grandiose that lasts for years. Or grandiose is fun. Like you think you're more brilliant than you actually are. The snowball effect. Instead of shifting to a new delusion, the existing one grows. If a neighbor smiles at them, it's not a new delusion, it's proof of the current one. Okay. Right. So you just add to the existing delusion. For example, they are smiling because they think they've successfully poisoned my mail. That's a bit of a stretch, but okay. Monodelusional, because the rest of the brain's hardware is healthy. It resists total collapse. It holds on to the rest of reality with an iron grip, making the one delusion even harder to uproot, because it is so deeply woven into an otherwise normal life. Alright, so I guess, okay, I get it now, the snowball effect. So you do have delusions, but every time you have a new delusion, you justify it by adding it to the existing one, right? So like if you think people are trying to kill you, if that's a delusion, every time you have that delusion, so you see someone and you think they're trying to kill you, you add it to the existing one. So that's the snowball effect. It's not that they, have one thing that they're delusional about, but every delusion is rationalized into one thing. I think it's the better way to describe it. Three, skepticism versus delusion. Where is the line? This is a vital distinction for your students. We differentiate healthy skepticism or even extreme beliefs from delusional disorder using three main criteria. A, evidence resistance, the unshakable test. I mean, a lot of people are evidence resistant. Again, I mean, are a lot of people delusional? A lot of people are. evidence resistance. I'm just saying. Skeptic, I think the government might be spying on me. If you show a skeptic their phone is clean and explain the technology, they might say maybe, but I'm still staying cautious. They remain open to the possibility of being wrong. I mean, they say that, but they might be lying to you. Delusional, even when presented with irrefutable counter evidence, the belief doesn't budge. In fact, counter evidence often strengthens the delusion. For example, the fact that the phone looks clean proves how advanced their hacking is. Okay, but it's a subtle difference though, right? It's a subtle difference. Because the skeptic still doesn't believe you, and the delusional person also still doesn't believe you. You know what I mean? The skeptic's still like, yeah, maybe, but I still don't really believe you. It's a fine line. The non-bizarre trap. As we discussed, these delusions are possible. Yeah, this makes it harder for family members to notice. However, the intensity and preoccupation are the red flags. A healthy skeptic goes to work and forgets about the FBI for a few hours. A person with a delusional disorder is consumed by it. It becomes the central organizing principle of their life. Okay, so that's interesting. So this is the salience thing, right? Um, so this is the part where the salience score is extremely high. So your brain thinks it's super important. Whereas, I can have a belief about something that isn't true, but I don't think it's that important. And that's not a delusion disorder, right? It's just me being silly. But even like a conspiracy theory, like maybe I believe the Earth is flat, but I don't think about it 24 hours a day. Whereas the delusional person or delusion disorder person would think about it 24 hours a day, I guess. Social relational ruin. Healthy skepticism usually doesn't end a marriage or result in a person losing their job. Delusional disorder almost always ends with a clash with reality that causes social or legal consequences. Okay, right, okay. Yeah. Yeah, so like if somebody believes that the moon landings were faked, for example, but they don't actually talk about it that much. Like they don't really care that much. They just believe it. When you ask them, they tell you, yeah, no, they were fake. But if you didn't ask them, they just wouldn't care about it. So that's not delusion disorder. Whereas if somebody is obsessed by it, then it is. All right. Number four, the two-factor failure, the hardware view. To keep the three-story house analogy going, factor one, the basement, an itch or a feeling of significance is generated. Two, the penthouse. The CEO is supposed to check the itch against reality. Right, so your limbic system gives you a feeling, and then your prefrontal cortex is supposed to figure out whether that feeling is right or not. In delusional disorder, the right frontal lobe, specifically the area that handles belief evaluation, is malfunctioning. It has lost the ability to say no to a hypothesis. It's like a judge who accepts every piece of evidence as guilty without trial. Um, hmm. Can can delusional disorder be treated? If it has been isolated to one specific area of the right frontal lobe, could could some sort of targeted intervention change things? Question mark. Treating delusional disorder is notoriously difficult, often described as the Mount Everest of psychiatry. This is because of anosognosia, the brain's inability to recognize its own dysfunction. Mm. Since the logic center is being used to defend the delusion, the patient perceives the doctor's attempt to help as part of the conspiracy or a sign of the doctor's incompetence. When you try to help them, they think you're part of the conspiracy. Wow. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, I see how that works. It's just, that's literally crazy, man. However, because we have identified the hardware involved, there are ways to intervene. The pharmacological approach, quieting the itch. Even though the brain appears normal, the underlying driver is often an over-aroused dopamine system in the midbrain. Hmm. Antipsychotics, dopamine blockers, drugs like pimoside, or risperidone don't necessarily delete the delusion, but they lower the salience. I'm sure that helps a lot. The effect, the person might still believe their neighbor is stealing electricity, but they've stopped feeling the urgent need to call the police every 10 minutes. It turns the volume down from a scream to a whisper, allowing the person to function in society again. So they're still they're still delusional. They just don't care anymore. Targeted neuromodulation, fixing the judge. Since we have isolated the malfunction to the right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, RDLPFC, the belief evaluator, researchers are looking at ways to physically reset the area. Oh yeah, let's just physically intervene into your brain. Transcranial magnetic stimulation. By placing a magnetic coil over the right frontal lobe, doctors can send pulses to stimulate that specific evidence checking circuit. The goal is to wake up the part of the brain that says, wait, is there another explanation for this? It's essentially trying to increase the brain's cognitive flexibility so it can stop being so rigid. Notice that there's nothing about whether it works or not. Doctors are trying this method, but there's nothing to be said about whether it works. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, the software patch. You cannot argue a person out of a delusional logic, a delusion using direct logic. Instead, therapists use a specialized form of CBT called cognitive insight therapy. The Socratic method, rather than saying you're wrong, the therapist asks questions that encourage the person to notice the process of their thinking. Metacognitive training. This helps the patients realize they have a jump to conclusions bias. It's like teaching a driver to realize the car always veers to the right so they can learn to compensate by steering slightly left. Yeah, that's so interesting though, right? Because if you tell them they're wrong, they just lump you in with the conspiracy. You have to somehow convince them to recognize that they are wrong by themselves. Like, you can't tell them they're wrong. You have to ask them questions until they recognize that they are wrong. I don't know how well this would work though, because they have to like do it themselves all the time. Hmm. Can it be cured? In the sense of the belief vanishing entirely, that is rare. However, clinical recovery is very possible. Right? Encapsulation, the goal. Successful treatment often results in the patient still holding the belief but tucking it away. They might say, I still think the FBI is watching me, but I've realized that talking about it makes my life harder, so I'm going to focus on my job instead. You know what? It's not that important. The safety signal. By strengthening the prefrontal cortex, we help the brain create a safety signal that overrides the danger signal of the delusion. Yeah, no, that's still a problem. I mean, they can snap at any time, I think. I mean, sure, you tuck it away, but imagine if they get stressed out, if they experience some difficulties in their life. It's like because you're holding it back, but once you let go, it comes back, right? Because it's not cured. Why the right frontal lobe is the key? It's a fascinating neurological fact that damage to the right hemisphere is much more likely to cause delusions than damage to the left. This one, not this one. Left brain, the interpreter. It tries to make sense of the world and find patterns. Right brain is the anomaly detector. It's the part that says, hey, this pattern doesn't fit reality. When the right side is weak, as in delusional disorder, the left brain is allowed to run wild, creating elaborate stories to explain away glitches. And there's no anomaly detector to call foul. Right. So they do slightly different things. This one is left is looking for patterns. Right is trying to check the patterns to see if it makes sense. Mm. Okay, so I actually want to ask about drugs, right? Um, we know that certain drugs cause hallucinations. I believe LSD is well known to do this. I think also magic mushrooms, psilocybin, whatever it's called. And I think magic mushrooms as well. Um, do these do such hallucinogenic hallu hallucin hallu hallucinogenic drugs? No, that's not how you spell hallucinogenic. Do such hallucinogenic drugs cause the brain to behave in ways similar to uh, schizophrenia or delusional disorder? What happens to the brain? To the brain under the influence of such drugs? This is a central question in psychopharmacology. For decades, scientists believed that LSD and psilocybin, magic mushrooms, created a model psychosis that mimicked schizophrenia. However, with modern brain imaging, we've discovered that while the result, hallucinations, might look similar, the neurological mechanism is actually quite different. Really? But it has similar results. In our three-story house, if schizophrenia is a filter failure in the basement, psychedelics are more like a temporary coup by the imagination. One, the serotonin 2A receptor, the master switch. Unlike schizophrenia, which is driven largely by dopamine, psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin primarily target serotonin, specifically the 5-HT2A receptor. What they are, these receptors are found in massive clusters in the cerebral cortex, the penthouse. The effect. When these drugs bind to the receptors, they make the CEO neurons fire wildly and unpredictably. Instead of being organized, the cerebral cortex starts sending out chaotic signals. I mean, you can see that as very fun or very alarming. So, your brain just starts sending random signals. Your neurons just start firing randomly. Okay, I mean that would explain the hallucinations, sure. That's so interesting. Also, it sounds very dangerous. Two, collapsing the default mode network. The most important discovery in psychedelic research is the effect on the default mode network. This is the brain's orchestra conductor, the system that keeps yourself or your ego, your past, your sense of boundaries in charge. In normal life, the default mode network keeps the brain's different modules, vision, hearing, emotion, in their own lanes. Right? So it's kind of keeping the parts separate. Under psychedelics, the default mode network collapses or deactivates. And so then everything starts merging together, right? The result, the modules start talking to each other directly without a coordinator. This causes synesthesia, seeing sounds or tasting colors, because the hearing part of the brain is suddenly plugged into the vision part, which is how you start seeing sounds. Right, so your brain becomes uncoordinated. Crazy. Comparison psychedelics versus schizophrenia, right? Different chemicals. Hallucination type. Psychedelics is more likely to be visual. Schizophrenia more likely to be auditory. Hmm. Sense of self, ego disillusion, feeling one with the universe. So you lose your sense of self. Ego fragmentation in schizophrenia, feeling broken or lost. That is a subtle difference. Awareness, so in psychedelics, the user usually knows they are on a drug, insight. Whereas in schizophrenia, the person often believes the hallucinations are 100% real. Huh. So it's not the same thing. It's actually quite different things. But they both have the result of hallucinations. A brain state hyperconnected, neo-chaotic links between regions. Underconnected, loss of gray matter and over-pruning. Hmm. What is actually happened during a trip? The thalamus, the filter. Just like in schizophrenia, the thalamus opens the gates. However, in a trip, it's not just noise getting through, it's an explosion of raw sensory data. The visual cortex. LSD causes the visual cortex to act as if it is receiving signals from the eyes, even when they're closed. It begins painting pictures using internal memories and patterns. Right, so this is like they talk about opening your third eye and you seeing all these colors and shapes. Right, so it's your your memory signals from your memories are going into your visual cortex. So it seems like it's coming from your eyes, but they're not. They're coming from other parts of your brain. The amygdala, psychedelics can make the amygdala hyperreactive, a bad trip full of fear, or they can dampen it, a mystical experience of peace. And you don't choose one or the other, whether it's a good trip or a bad trip. The reset potential, neuroplasticity. This is why these drugs are currently being studied as treatments for depression and PTSD. Because they collapse the default mode network, they allow the brain to break out of ruts. Right. The analogy, if your brain is a hill covered in snow and your thoughts are sleds, depression creates deep grooves in the snow that the sled always gets stuck in. A psychedelic experience is like a fresh snowfall that fills in the ruts, allowing the sled to find new paths. I mean, that's a very benign way of explaining it. I would explain it more like because your neurons become disconnected and disorganized and they're firing in every direction. It forms new connections in every direction, which gives you the opportunity to reprune in a different shape, right? I mean, I guess I'm saying the same thing. But you have to understand that the snow is not just snow, it's your neurons. Your neurons are growing new links because the drugs have, you know, desynchronized everything. And so it's just your neurons are just growing new connections in every direction. And then when you get off the drugs, then you can reshape those connections. Or you have the opportunity to shape those connections in a different way. But you have to be careful how you do it, right? I actually want to ask more about this. Um, Tell me more about the effect of drugs like LSD and psilocybin on neuroplasticity. Does it mean does it mean that a person's thoughts, memories, thought patterns, memories, and even personality can shift permanently over the course of prolonged psychedelics use? Right? Because if so, this seems like there is great potential for both positive and negative changes to a person brain. You've pinpointed exactly why the scientific community is currently both exhilarated and cautious. The fresh snowfall analogy isn't just a metaphor. We are seeing evidence of structural neuroplasticity, meaning these drugs can physically change the shape and connectivity of neurons. Wild. In the three-story house, if a traditional antidepressants are like a slow renovation, psychedelics are like knocking down the interior walls to rethink the entire floor plan. Yeah. Yeah, you just knock everything down and rebuild however you like. Except you have to be real careful how you do it, because if you do it wrong, you'll mess yourself up, right? Like if you take psychedelics and then you get traumatized, that would hurt you a lot more than if you didn't take the psychedelics and get traumatized, right? So potentially you can really mess someone up. If instead of just, torturing them, you give them psychedelics and then you torture them, that would be much worse. Psychoplastogens, rewiring the penthouse. Researchers have coined the term psychoplastogens to describe LSD, psilocybin, and DMT. These substances promote synaptogenesis, the growth of new connections between neurons. Dendritic branching. Within hours of exposure, neurons in the prefrontal cortex start to sprout new branches, dendrites, and leaves, synapses. The glitch fix. In chronic depression or PTSD, these branches often wither due to stress. Psychedelics act like a high-intensity fertilizer, forcing the CEO area of the brain to re-expand its reach. Yeah. So like, chronic depression, like you the depression, the sadness, it gets ingrained, right? And all the other parts get cut off from the main circuit. Whereas you take these drugs and it regrows the connections to the parts that have been disconnected earlier. Can personality shift permanently? Evidence suggests that even a single dose can lead to long-term changes in personality traits. A single dose? Even a single dose? The openness shift. One of the most consistent findings is a permanent increase in openness to experience, one of the big five personality traits. This includes being more imaginative, more curious about the world, and more appreciative of art and nature. Incredible. A single dose. Dissolving the I, because the default mode network, the ego center, is temporarily taken offline. The brain learns that the self is more flexible than it previously thought. This ego dissolution can break the rigid self-narratives, e.g. I'm a failure, that define many mental disorders. What? You can just break the self-narratives and just relearn new ones? I'm not saying you should do drugs because if you do it wrong, it can be really bad. But I'm just saying that this seems like it could do a lot of good if you do it right, right? The dual potential, positive versus negative. The potential for change is a double-edged sword because the brain enters a state of hyperplasticity. It becomes incredibly vulnerable to its environment. Yeah, yeah, that's what I thought. The positive potential, the healing path. Breaking ruts. By weakening the default mode network, the brain can escape the loops of OCD or the downward spirals of depression. Memory consolidation. In PTSD, the hyperplastic state may allow the hippocampus to finally refile traumatic memories into the past, similar to the EMDR process we discussed, but at a much higher intensity. Yeah, your brain is just a lot more flexible, right? And so you can repair things. Except there's a negative potential, the harm path. Ontological shock. If a person's cerebral cortex isn't strong enough to process the chaos, the collapse of the default mode network can lead to depersonalization, derealization, a persistent feeling that they or the world aren't real. Oh no, they've permanently lost touch with reality, right? So, like, because of the chaos, they couldn't handle the chaos. Now they don't know what's real anymore. Oh, that sounds bad, actually. That sounds awful. That's H HPPD, hallucinogen persisting perception disorder. In rare cases, the visual gates in the thalamus don't fully close again, leading to traces of visual snow that last for years. So you're just seeing things, permanently seeing visions, and you can't control them. It's rare cases. It doesn't happen that often. Triggering latent psychosis. Yeah, no, this one's a big one. For those with a genetic predisposition to schizophrenia, forcing the brain into a state of hyperconnectivity can act as the trigger that begins the overpruning process we talked about earlier, right? So if you're already susceptible to schizophrenia, making the brain more plastic can just allow the schizophrenia to overprune even more than before. Mm, yeah. So things can go wrong. The critical period. The brain doesn't just change during the trip, it enters a window of plasticity that can last for days or weeks afterwards. Integration. This is why psychedelic assisted therapy is so important. If you grow new branches in a dark, stressful room, they might grow in a negative direction. Yeah, or like any stressful environment. If you grow them in a safe, therapeutic environment, you can guide the new wiring towards healthier patterns. Yeah, so this is the important part. If you try to do this, and I don't suggest you do, but if you try to do this, you have to be sure you don't get traumatized in the weeks afterwards, because otherwise that might stick with you, right? Like anything bad that happens to you in that time, they can stick with you, and that makes things worse. So this is kind of interesting. The Phineas Gage, let's go back to Phineas Gage this time, because he suffered accidental plasticity. He didn't choose to have his brain damaged. Phineas Gage is the ultimate example of negative plasticity. His brain was forced to rewire itself after a massive trauma. But because he lost his regulatory center, the prefrontal cortex, the new wiring led to a personality that was less social, less organized, and less functional. Hmm. Psychedelics offer a way to induce the same level of rewiring, but without the rod. We are attempting to use the brain's natural ability to change to restore the CEO rather than destroy it. However, as you noted, if the reset happens without proper guidance, the result can be as disorienting as Gage's personality shift. A brain that is different but not necessarily better. Hmm. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, very interesting. But also, I mean, I don't recommend anybody do drugs in an uncontrolled environment. But just think about this, right? Like, if you do, if you want to take psilocybin or LSD, just think very carefully. Like where you're doing it, who you're doing it with, and under what conditions you're doing it. If you're happy and comfortable and safe, that might be a good thing. If you're doing it in a place that's not safe and not stable, and with people you don't like, that might be a disaster. And it could be a permanent disaster. Very interesting. Okay, let me end the segment on psychosis here. In the next one, I'm gonna go into personality disorders. Okay, I'll see you next time. So interesting.